Man,
Really?
thanks again. I'll come fix something for you sometime. You don't want it to work when I get done.
It looks so different.
Give you something else to fix. What's wrong with this machine? I'll Steve took it. Fix it.
So you will have changed something if I do that.
How are you?
I'm well, how are you?
Good.
Jared, you want a coffee?
That's right. Last meeting, I was brand new grandpa. I missed the last.
Oh, this, you missed this.
I missed this meeting last time.
Yeah,
That was the day after Hannah's baby born. Yeah. I was busy.
Well, yours must be old.
Yours are closer. Me too. That's right. We're making notes on this. It's the same thing.
Hi.
Except I'm quite confident you are not at all the same.
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, good evening and welcome to this public hearing between the Budget Committee and the, it's not
Select board.
between, it's
With-
public hearing with the Budget Committee and the Select Board, the Town Manager and the Finance Director. I'll call the meeting to order at 6:31. If you can join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So there is participation on Zoom tonight. We have an agenda. We'll have introductions for not 10 minutes.
Let's see,
A
we're doing all-
review of our budget
Start
and meeting
already.
goals, which will not take 5 minutes. Eric will give us a presentation and we'll have discussion. And if there's any other business at the end, that would be for 5 minutes and closing comments. We didn't have any last time. I don't suspect we're going to tonight. So we'll start with introducing the select board. We'll start with Dave.
Steve DeAngelis.
Sean Keegan.
And Catherine Woodson.
And for the Budget Committee, I'm Andy Tolman.
Chris Salmon.
Ed Sims. And for town staff, I'm Eric Dyer.
Teresa Shaw.
And then-
And our secretary, Angelica Pittman. Okay, does anyone from the select board have any comments they'd like to make? Is any introduction? Anyone from the budget committee?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, I'll state that this is the second one of these meetings we've had this year. I think after this meeting, we might have a little discussion as to whether we need to hold 2 again next year. If this actually met a need or not that the public may have had. So far, Eric, this isn't in color. Is this my slide?
So you are, you've done the introductions.
I'm on budget process summary.
Yeah, budget process summary is you.
So we've had 17 public meetings and presentations to develop and discuss the budget since October. We have had review and comment by members of the public, boards and committees, the budget committee, and the select board. We've reviewed the budget details for all departments and divisions, and we have reviewed and revised the 5-year capital plan and the revised accounting structure. Our public budget meeting goals are to present the 24-25, also known as the fiscal year 25 municipal budget, in the summary form tonight. To hear any questions, concerns, and comments related to the budget. We're going to highlight and discuss key warrant articles, the proposed land use ordinance revisions, the proposed church road sidewalk, and the proposed fairgrounds community park, and provide information on the upcoming town meeting and secret ballot vote.
Andy, you can take the next slide
So
if you'd like to.
I'd love to, thank you. So we could have something to say. So we have a number of ongoing budget goals we want that we in the select board have agreed on. We try to maintain fiscal responsibility and spend conservatively. At the same time, we want to fund all necessary and needed expenditures to maintain our town and programs. We want to minimize the impact of that spending on taxpayers. We want to maintain a stable and sustainable level of debt, to use our fund balances responsibly, to use a long-range capital planning process to help us accomplish several of those goals, and to consider the town budget separately from the school and county budgets, since we have some control over our budget, but much less control over either the county or the school budget. We also pledge to work together towards public good in all of this. Do I do that?
So back to Catherine for.
Okay, that's okay.
Ongoing budget goals.
So the budget goals that were set for this year were to prioritize investment in recreational assets and public facilities, specifically a coordinator for community programming, if we can find someone to hire. Readfield Fairgrounds Community Park and the Church Road sidewalk. We are striving to pursue creative financing, grants, and community donations for projects. We continue to improve communication and collaboration in the budget process. I'm not sure we can continue to improve. I think we are there. So I don't know of anything else that we can do. We have done a great job, so I think we're there. We can better define our capital projects and further develop the capital investment plan. That is going to be the focus of our 2nd June workshop meeting, the 3rd Monday in June.
The 17th.
The 17th. Budget committee and select board at 6:30 to 7:30 will be doing that, and complete the transition in the accounting. And now it's to Eric.
Yeah, so as has been mentioned before, we've done this a few times. I'm hoping to move through this fairly quickly. We do have a lot of information on the town website. I'll just point people there over and over and over again, and it's an active site. So things are updated regularly. We have information on the homepage. We have information from the boards and committees that are involved with this, including the select board and the budget committee, meeting minutes, all that information is up there. Recordings of discussions, tremendous amount of information. Kristen has done a great job curating the information for the RSU referendum vote, the town meeting vote, and also the state, I guess it's the primary, is that right? Well, anyway, yeah, so all that's up on the site, and we'll be, that's all, those are all things we'll be voting on the 11th. But the website is the place where we house a lot of information. We do also have it in other forms if people need it. Paper copy, we can print, we can do whatever. And I will say that if you sign up for the e-alerts on the website, you're much more able to get information just directly sent to you. It is an opt-in program, so if you sign up just for select board or just for budget or just for soccer signups, rec type stuff, that's what you get. So we're not spamming you, no one's sending junk mail, it's just important information, and we try to be very conscious about how often and how we send that stuff out. So anyway, that's really about how to get information. And I'll just talk about big picture stuff here. The assessor has recommended a 20% factor applied to residential and commercial properties. In the past, we've only bumped up residential properties over the past several years of past 5 years of increases. But we've finally gotten to the point where we see commercial, what limited commercial we have in town, needing to get a little bit of a bump to come more in line with what the state expects as well. So the net has been 65% increase in assessed values since 2020. So just a staggering amount of increase, but again, not driven by the town of Readfield, driven by the state of Maine. If we don't keep pace with their estimates, we lose money. And that's just how it works. So we've done our best, and we're still just at 90, 95, maybe as low as 80, depending on how you do the math and what year you look at. But we're struggling to keep up with them, and we're still having to see these big increases. But that doesn't necessarily affect the mill rate or what you pay in taxes. What happens is if there's a 10% increase in valuation, the mill rate will drop by 10%. So there is a relationship there, but it's inverse. What we have this year, though, is a 2.27 mill rate for the town and a total estimated mill rate of about 13.42. And the last year, just for comparison's sake, that was 14.16. And I'll try to get this thing to work. There we go. Okay. And so what that essentially means is we've got about a 7.2% increase overall in the actual tax impact, but it's not being reflected in the mill rate. So it just shows how not to say how little. It just shows that the mill rate is a finicky number, and the best thing you can look at is what you're paying out of pocket. So municipal budget highlights for departments. I'll start off and say that we've had about 5% increase in wages across the board. That's just universal in large part due to the negotiated contract we have. We lost $60,000 in state revenue sharing, and that's very impactful for us to lose that revenue. I think would have very little increase this year if not for that, but it's hard to just point to one thing because there are so many different things happening in this budget this year. But in any event, that was a big hit. $73,000 net cost increase, and our appropriations just under $1 million at $979,000. We are budgeting for a 7.1% municipal tax increase for FY25. I mentioned that earlier. But the key thing that I see here is that brings us back to about 2019 levels. And the reason for that is we, during COVID, took a lot of effort and pain in some cases to lower expenditures, to offset things, to pull money out of the reserves, to defer projects. And we were able to go down and keep the mill rate low and the tax impact low while things were uncertain. Things are still not great, but they're getting better. And so we cannot and could not sustain that low level forever. We have to pave the roads, we have to do the work, we have to pay our staff. And so we've started to gradually come up out of that dip and bring the town expenditures and revenues as much as we can back in line with what we need. And so we're probably going to continue to see an escalation out of that dip, but at a slower rate. I don't think we'll see a 7% increase next year. I think it'll be less than that, hopefully much less. But again, that's next year. The school and county budgets are finished. Essentially, the county budget voters do not have a say in. That's been fixed. And they're looking at a 27% increase, better than the 45 they started with, but it's still smarts. And it used to be that the county budget was 5% of our out-of-pocket tax impacts. Now it's about 8%. I expect it to stay there. The services, the things that they're offering, the cost increases they're seeing, it's not a one-year fluctuation, and they've actually done a lot to suppress that increase. So I would expect that we'll see that number say, between 8 and 10% going forward, which isn't good news, but it is what it is. And then the school budget, that's still needing a second vote, and that's what we'll be voting on June 11th, is that final confirmation vote. They're looking to go up 7.4%, so a little bit more than the town at this point, but they do account for 75% of the proposed taxes as far as out-of-pocket cost, and so that will be felt. This is a graph that just shows those trend lines and where we are. The top line, the red line, larger dashes, is the school budget, and you can see they had a COVID dip, but they have kind of come back and are on the same trajectory of roughly 6 to 7% annual cost increase. And so if COVID hadn't happened, they'd probably be about where they are right now. So they're similarly, following their trajectory. The town, you see the lower line, smaller dash is blue. That is, you see the 2019 peak, down again, back up again. So we're doing, I think, very well when it comes to the out-of-pocket impacts. We've been as responsible as we can. But like I said, we will expect to see a gradual increase just like we saw before COVID over time. And then the county, they're looking really good until about 2024, and then we have that big spike. But that's going to be the new normal, as I mentioned. Municipal property taxes, this kind of brings all these things I talked about together. The home value was $200,000 for an average residential home. So that's a single family home on acreage in Readfield back in 2020 is now worth $330,000. So, and then this shows what the municipal mill rate was over time. Again, it's gone down a little bit, but that's in large part because of the factoring. But the town out-of-pocket tax impacts are the middle column there. And you see we're at 749 for an average home assessed at $330,000. And back in 2019, we were at 778, a little bit less than that, 2020, and you can see the dip if you follow up that chart. And fund highlights. This is where we talk about the things that we use to help stabilize the budget and have a proper reserve for the town. It's our savings account. It's our buffer in case of emergencies. And we do use this to offset taxes and capital expenditures at times also. These are conservative and I try to look at fund balances and make sure that we're not overestimating balances, because that would be the worst thing we could do, to think we have money we don't. But when you look at it, we actually only have real numbers through 2023 at this point. We're in 2024 and we're going to be wrapping up that fiscal year, and then we'll work with the auditors, but we're working with numbers from 2023 and projecting up to 2025. So it's a bit of a challenge, and that's why we try to be a little bit conservative. The undesignated funds, designated funds are those things that apply to specific projects or project areas, and they're estimated $100,000 due to capital project needs and ARPA funds. And we are using the remainder of our ARPA funds this year. That's a question that's come up in the past. And those are being applied indirectly to the sidewalk project, although I guess direct application will be to the road reserve. The undesignated funds are just the funds that we have that don't have a specific purpose. They're general funds. And those use of those is up $50,000. Those balances we'll look at a little bit later, but we are trying to draw both designated and undesignated funds down responsibly in the next couple of years, and you'll see that we're starting to do that. And these are covered by a policy that says that 2/12 of our total annual budget expenditure, including school and county expenditures, are there for a minimum balance. I'm much more comfortable and advocate for a 3/12 policy or a 1/4 if we want to simplify that. And then this is what they look like. So you can see 2023 are the numbers we actually have. And what I'm looking to do, and I think the town is looking to do, is bring those balances down so that they're much closer to where they were, 2019, 2020, with the exception of having a slightly higher balance in the undesignated fund, which is the blue, and the bar that's on the right for anybody that has color difficulties. But the point here is that we have funds, we try to use them responsibly, and we are working to do that. Another piece of the big picture here, and this is the last big picture item before we get the details, would be the debt service. And we've had a mixture of bonds floated over the past several years. When I first started here, we retired some bonds for road work. And since then, we've actually gotten to the point where we budget for road expenses more or less on an annual basis, and we don't have the burden of the added cost of bonding for road work. And that, I think, is a healthy thing and something I'd like to continue with. But what we've also done is balance these bonds out so that we don't have any large spikes. We still may, if there's an emergency that comes up, we may have to borrow. But what you see on this chart from left to right is a gradual decrease in debt service payments that we are obligated to make. And this shows that we are having a steady expense here. Again, no big surprises, but also trying to work that down to a reasonable level. And we have had debates, and we'll continue to have debates about what the best level of borrowing is for the town. But I guess I wanted to just point that out, that we have a good positive trend here. So I'm going to stop there and ask if you have any questions or comments from anybody in the public here or online. I'm just going to get out of the Zoom. Can I do that? that, and I want to stop sharing just a second here.
There's nobody here. There's no one on the Zoom.
There's no one
Sean's
on
it.
Zoom.
I'm watching. Sorry.
Sean's watching. Okay, all right. Well, then I guess anybody.
Any comments from
Yeah.
in the room? Okay, have you had enough of a break? Need a sip of Moxie?
I actually hadn't opened my Moxie. It was hidden behind my screen. Thanks for track that over.
Yeah, don't want to forget that.
I mean, you were zooming through, so that was great. And the previous budget meeting that we had 3 weeks ago is online, correct?
It is online, and there was some great discussion around the sidewalk project and the fairgrounds project at that time too, so. Yeah, all right, well, I will get back to the screen share. Which,
You never stopped sharing, so you're.
oh, am I? Okay, all right, then I guess I'll just get back to the,
Very speedy.
Full screen though.
slide. See what happens. All right, there we are. Beautiful. Picture perfect. All right, so revenue highlights. We are looking at a 1.5% tax base increase. And I have been pushing the assessor to make sure that he is capturing value responsibly, but also making sure that errors that are happening in the revaluation or that are being corrected during the revaluation are also addressed, right? So we're in the middle of a revaluation. That means the assessor's out looking at properties and checking and comparing their value to one another. We won't be doing a large across the board adjustment until after all that work is done. However, we will be taking out that shed that collapsed in your backyard and you had hauled off. You won't be taxed for that if that's missing and it wasn't reported. But if you added a sunroom and didn't tell us about it, then you might be paying a little bit extra in taxes. But that's really what I'm getting at, is that there are some of those things that are happening as part of the revaluation process, but most of this increase comes from people simply working on their homes, making improvements, getting building permits, adding sheds, or building new construction. We have seen quite a bit of new construction in town over the past couple of years, and this year we seem to be plateauing, but we still have a pretty good clip. Many revenue lines look to be down when you start looking at them in detail, but that in large part is due to changes in the accounting structure. So that includes things like capital, solid waste, the fund balances, interlocal CEO and unclassified departments. State revenue sharing, as I mentioned earlier, it is just an estimate, but it's down 14%, 430,000 to 370,000. So you can see how impactful that is. Investment income is up, but that's because we have more funds in CDARS, which are a safe, bank held deposit. They give us right now 5.25% for a 6-month yield, and that's great. And we're going to continue to roll those things forward and make money off of them. And that's another reason why it's good to have a healthy reserve balance, because 5% of $1 million is $50,000. That's good. That's what we want. We want to have that income coming in. Motor vehicle revenues are up by $25,000, and I have been tracking those closely, and I do believe with a fair degree of confidence that we're going to be able to maintain that. It's a reasonable estimate. We'll probably exceed it, actually, because despite what people have said or told the polls, people continue to buy vehicles, and they continue to buy expensive vehicles, and they continue to register them. So that's good for our revenue line. Department 96 transfers includes $22,650 in use of designated funds to offset tax impacts. And I'll just note that that's a new department as part of our accounting structure. And that really just relates to things that in the past had been maybe funding for capital projects. But what has happened is we are only showing tax impacts. So if we're planning on spending money out of a reserve, that money's there because voters approved it, and there's a process for spending it. The select board would have to approve it, but it's not going to affect the tax rate. And so that's not being included or discussed or shown actively in this budget process. But of course, it shows up in the audit and it shows up in the regular discussions of the select board. So I just wanted to explain what that Department 96 was, because transfers isn't a really clear explanation, but that's just what we call it, because it is varied in how it's used. So this table shows the revenue by department. There's a lot of aggregation here. Administration is where all of our tax revenue and almost all of our non-tax revenue comes from. And so that is the big chunk. And right now, there's not much change there, but what that's kind of hiding is a decrease in non-tax revenue and an increase in tax revenue, which is why we see that 7% increase in what people are paying out of pocket for the town, 7.4 for the school, and 24% for the county. So I won't get into too much detail here. I'll just say that it does show again that we're having a decrease, but that is a direct result of the changes in the accounting structure and not in actual, actual expenditures and revenues. Any questions on revenues before I go on to expenses? And I won't stop the screen share because well, it's a pain, but anybody local? Okay, I'll move on. Expense highlights. Administration, labor and insurance costs are up about $22,000. Again, that's just, we're gonna see this in all the departments. Labor and insurance expenses are a big contributor to that. Assessing is up $5,300 to cover map updates and software. Code enforcement looks to be down, but it's actually not. Again, this is one of those ones where we had been showing the money, the expense that was being attributed to the town of Wayne because we share that position. So we would be showing last year, we would have shown the expense and then the offsetting revenue. This year, we're not messing around with that because it doesn't really give a true picture of what taxpayers are on the hook for. So we're just showing now what the town of Readfield is obligated to pay for our assessing or our code enforcement services. And that's, is one reason, one way that account restructuring has helped with transparency and clarity. Because before it looked like it was $80,000 and it was really only closer to 40. So heating assistance was zeroed out and moved to a special revenue account. Legal fees are down $10,000 due to the diminished risk of litigation. We also have a healthy reserve, so I feel comfortable putting less money in the operating budget because we have more in reserve to cover those potential liabilities. Maintenance department up $8,900. Again, labor and material costs. Community services, the library is up by $3,500, mostly due to labor, but money well spent. Recreation, parks and activities, beach expenses are down. And that's because we have a change in the structure for rec programming. We took away the beach superintendent position and we rolled that into a community programming coordinator position. So there's a reduction and then there's an increase. And that program that I just mentioned, the rec community programming coordinator, the net impact there is about $20,000, $22,000. So we are in fact increasing for that, but that's been a priority of the select board, the rec board, town staff, and many residents, I think, for a long time, because we have so much opportunity in this town and a lot of dedicated volunteers and a lot of good staff, but we just can't keep up with everything that's happening. So protection, the fire department is up, wage and stipend increases. Ambulance budget is up an estimated 10%. I think we're going to be okay with that. I've been talking to the Winthrop town manager. They're looking to change their formula a little bit, but I made it clear to him that I didn't want, and we wouldn't be really in favor of any type of formula that had the town of Readfield paying for Winthrop services, or vice versa. We don't want them losing money. But I think that we're going to have a fair shake. They're just looking at a formula that isn't simply per capita, but it's per capita and then a combination of call volumes, which makes sense. So the higher users might pay a little bit more, but that's not us right now. So I think we're in good shape. We'll see what happens. Dispatching is up an estimated 5%. That one I think will be pretty stable. We got some numbers recently that were that number or less. Yeah, okay, Teresa's nodding, so that's good. I'm not making stuff up. Cemetery budget is a $2,000 decrease, and I want to thank them as always for that. Anytime we have a department that says, looks at their expenditures, looks at their revenues and says, we're not expending fully our budget, and they voluntarily have a reduction, that's what we want, that's good, that's responsible spending, it's responsible public service provision. And in the future, that number might change, it might go back up again if we have more demand, but oh geez, I guess I'm done. All right, I can give it a clap.
Thanks, Eric.
So anyway, that's another reason why this accounting structure change is important, because it incentivizes that. There's no incentive in leaving money in the budget to just roll in the general fund, right? So there's value in this this change that we're going through. Roads and drainage were up over $50,000 for summer road maintenance. I'll explain that in a little bit of detail and just say, as I have before, that we have seen a lot of damage to the roads from storms. And some of that can be reimbursed by FEMA, but sometimes it's not. And in the end, we're looking at maintenance and preventative maintenance. And so we are trying to actively upgrade our culverts, harden our ditch lines, cut the trees back and give more room for sunlight to come in, and do those things that can help protect and enhance the road structure and infrastructure. And we need money to do that, so that's what we're asking for. And I do hope people support that, because it will save us money in the long run. We have a small decrease in winter road expenses. That's due to less than expected inflation. Our contract, we start off with a fixed bid price, and then we escalate based on inflation, and inflation's gotten better. It's not great, but it's a lot better than what we expected and a lot better than what we budgeted for. So we were able to reduce that from last year's numbers and still meet our needs and the needs of the contractor. Capital improvements, these were removed from the operating budget and moved to capital reserves. So you won't see $500,000, $1 million, $250,000, or $10,000 projects in the operating budget anymore. They don't belong there. And that was another change the auditors recommended that are part of this overall structural change we're going through. So those big numbers, they're not there. It makes the budget much more easy to read, much more consistent, and you can actually tell better what's happening. So capital investment plan is what we use to manage capital expenditures. And those have been moved to Department 96, which is the department that funds those reserve accounts and those capital projects. So again, we're not showing the full cost of a fire truck or the full cost of a salt sand shed. We're showing how much money we're putting aside to either pay for it or in some cases to pay for the debt service that might accompany it. But in any event, Department 96, similar to the revenue side, is a transfer type account. And that shows $13,000 for transfer station, municipal buildings, $40,000. That's to help cover the cost that was unanticipated of the $15,000 septic tank out back, and other project needs that are coming up. Roads, $275,000. That I think is a little bit low, but we'll see what we can do and what we find for prices this year. Administrative technology, that's for low power FM equipment, $5,000. We're looking at a 2-year plan to build emergency radio service now that we have a license from the FCC to do that. And that'll be great when we don't have cell service, which we found out can happen last year. So we're moving on that. Fire department, $25,000. I'll point out with this one particularly that doesn't cover the anticipated expenses. So remember that chart that I showed when we had the numbers that were going up and down, 2 bars side by side, and they started to drop off, and the red bars dropped off more aggressively than the blue bars. So those red bars are the reserves, and what this number represents is for one of those designated reserve accounts, and in aggregate, that's what they represent, that we're taking out more money than we're putting in. So these look like they're big numbers, but in many cases, the cost of doing business is more than what you see here. And that's, well, anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Maintenance, $34,000, that covers truck leases and savings for new equipment in case we have a breakdown. And by the way, that Newtown truck should be arriving in late June, getting outfitted, and we should have it on the road with a nice fancy Town of Readfield sticker on it sometime in July. So. And then cemetery, $5,000 for reserves for that.
What color's the truck gonna be?
Red,
Of course.
we like red. It's high visibility. Yeah.
Thank you.
Solid waste, we show a decrease here, but again, accounting changes. We're actually seeing about a 7% increase, which is consistent with the rest of the municipal budget. And again, labor and contract costs are a big part of that. We contract with several providers for trash hauling, trash tipping, and they've been escalating more quickly than inflation, so we're feeling that. The education tax, which is not a municipal tax, 7.4% increase, $300,000. County tax, again, not municipal, close to $100,000 there, increase. Debt service, 13,202. That's a decrease because, well, of that graph that I showed you earlier. And unclassified, most lines here were moved to special revenue accounts and their operating expenses were zeroed out. So some of these accounts have balances that are so volatile or so small, or the way we manage them, it made more sense for them to be managed as a special revenue as opposed to just an operating department. And we're talking about things that maybe have $2,000 to $5,000 balances, lines like bottle deposit money that we get from the transfer station. That didn't need to be a special division in the budget. So here we have another table that shows all of these things. Again, it shows a 7.4% reduction, but that's actually not true. It's just the accounting that shows that. And I've talked about the real numbers throughout this. And so I'll stop again with any public questions or comments.
Do we have anything on the line, Sean? Anybody in the room? You're not getting much of a break here.
I know, but I'm gonna take another sip of Moxie before I move on. Actually, I'm gonna take a sip of Moxie and then let Jerry talk.
Right, so we're up to the Fairgrounds Community Park. And Jerry's gonna give us a brief summary, but thorough.
I'm Jerry Bly. I'm one of the co-process leaders of the Fairgrounds Working Group. And with the chair's permission, I'll be very brief. 2 out of the 3 members of the public here are members of the working group. The third, I know, is well versed in the subject. And so.
Hereby granted.
Okay. All right. Good. All right, next slide.
Yes, sir.
So very brief history of the fairgrounds. The town acquired the property in 1993. The Conservation Commission and others developed a management plan. In 2005, a small portion of the fairgrounds was transferred to allow for expansion of the cemetery. In 2008, while there were some rugged trails on the fairgrounds, the newly created Readfield Trails Committee developed the trail system that we now all enjoy today, the gravel trails and all that. 2014, the ball field was created through a very collaborative and public-minded effort with an expanded parking area. Fast forward to 2022, that's when the first proposal for a softball field and basketball court came to a vote at town meeting. At that point in time, it was going to be funded by tax dollars, and there was a fairly decisive vote against doing that. That led to the creation of the Fairgrounds Working Group in early 2023 that developed the consensus-based proposal for the softball field and additional amenities. Last year's town meeting voted in support of continuing that planning effort and to bring a proposal to the town at a future town meeting. And then early this year, after a lot of hard work by the Fairgrounds Working Group, a concept plan was presented to town residents in January and generally received broad public support. That's been refined and cost estimates and various other things done over the past number of months, which brings us to today. Fairgrounds Working Group, very diverse, involved group. We had 5 town committees represented. We had public members. We had 3 affiliated organizations with liaisons on there. So we had a broad spectrum of input. And at the bottom there, it just emphasizes that all decisions were made by consensus. So a diverse group having to come to a common vision Took a lot of work, but worked effectively, thanks in part to your own Steve DeAngelis here. Next slide. So the proposal, very briefly, major component and the whole reason for really the start of this initiative was the need for a softball field. Came up with a design that constructs that softball field at the same grade as the existing baseball field. So not only can it be used to provide a softball field for the town's girls, but can also be combined with the baseball field to provide for other field sports, most notably soccer, but could also be lacrosse and other things. It also provides a really ample space for community events, including Heritage Days, Halloween events, and others. The basketball court, we received a year ago very strong input that if we're going to move forward with a park here, it should include a basketball court, at least in the village area. We checked out a variety of sites, from the beach to several sites at the community school and a variety of sites at the fairgrounds, and ultimately ended up agreeing that the proposed site here next to the baseball field was the optimal site. For that court will also be able to be used for pickleball and other court sports. The trail system will largely remain in place with the addition of an accessible trail near and around the parking lot that will wind its way through a planned pollinator garden there. Accessibility was factored into all our decisions, so the entire development will be accessible to people with mobility limitations, be able to get to both of the fields on accessible trails or roads. The accessible trail that I mentioned will have an accessible outhouse there as part of it. We will have accessible parking spots there as well. So the age-friendly committee in particular really brought that emphasis and priority to our work. We're going to, obviously we're developing a substantial portion of the field area of the fairgrounds, but it was done in a way that preserved some of the most important field habitat there for pollinators and other wildlife there. So conservation was definitely a part of our thinking. I mentioned the pollinator garden. And then in terms of infrastructure, we're talking about paving, redesigning, slightly expanding the parking area and paving it, the paving really to allow for more effective utilization. You can paint lines so people park where they're supposed to, as opposed to, in ways that are inefficient. We plan to bring in both water and electricity, the electricity to allow for things such as community events in the field area. Similarly, the water to provide a source of water for drinking water, as well as for utilitarian uses. The cemetery has the opportunity to access that water much closer than any other existing water source for them as well. So that's pretty much the design. Next slide. The cost, basically it's $1 million project. 2/3 of that is really focused on the softball field. A lot of earth has to be moved, a lot of drainage work and whatnot involved there. So that's the big ticket item as part of that budget. You can see the rest of these. I won't go through all of it here, but we had Mainland Development working with us, along with a landscape architect, park planner, Regina Leonard, working together. Mainland developed these cost estimates here for us, and we're fairly comfortable that they'll hopefully do the job. Next slide. So project funding, first and foremost, no tax dollars. We heard that message loud and clear, That was sort of part of our mantra from day one. So how are we going to make this happen? We do have a plan in place. We are assuming that the town meeting votes in support of this. We will be submitting a federal land and water conservation fund grant that's actually administered by the state that can fund up to half the cost of the project. We're quite confident that we can be successful there. Obviously, our fundraising really plan depends upon our being successful in that. Secondly, we're hoping that the National Guard will help out. It's a project that's well suited to their skill set in terms of moving dirt, putting in drainage, things like that. They'll provide labor. They won't contribute to the materials of the project. We've done our preliminary application to them and plan to pursue that more aggressively this summer. We're hoping that some of the contractors and businesses in and around town might contribute in-kind services to the project. We're looking at foundation grants. Alphon Foundation is one that's often mentioned, but there's others out there as well. We've really not begun to do any serious work on that. And then, of course, we'll be looking for local donations, both from individuals and businesses, and plan to do a number of fundraising events over the course of the next year. The plan is to construct it next year. We will have to push very hard on the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant timing to make that happen, but we're hoping to do that. Similarly, the National Guard sort of plans a year out, so that timing would work well there. 2 articles on the town warrant. One essentially authorizes the town to submit a grant application to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That's a required step in the process. And then the second is really just the town authorizing the overall projects, approving the overall project, being very clear that it will not be funded with tax dollars.
Amazing. You did that in 10 minutes.
Oh,
That was
Hope-
great.
I hope to do it in less.
Are there any questions from anyone attending in person? If you come to the microphone, you can.
I'm Hannah Flannery, Rec Department, part of the Fairgrounds Committee. I just wanted to add one thing that wasn't mentioned when he was talking about electricity. I know in the original proposal, there was a concession stand that is not in this, but what we came to a conclusion of was that if we had electricity there, we could either have a movable trailer or food trucks or anything of that sort that could be used for that purpose in events or games or anything to produce some revenue in that sense. So I just wanted to add that in.
Great.
And Hannah, while you're there, where are the girls playing this year?
The 12U team is playing in Augusta because we don't have a field to them.
Thanks.
And that's because we don't have a softball field.
Correct.
Thank you.
So last thing I'll say, we had the first gathering of organizing a meeting of a fundraising group. We have a small but good group, and I think we're off to a start there.
Anyone online? Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna make one comment here. It applies to both this project as well as the Church Road sidewalk. Some people have been saying out in the greater public that, there's no reason to use these funds. We're indebting our children forever. And if we weren't using these funds, the whole economy would be better for it. And my response to that is, these are dollars that are already committed by either the federal government, the state government, or by foundations to be charitable. And they're going to be used by somebody. So if we don't use these funds, somebody else will. And I think we have some great solid proposals here. And it's our responsibility to put this out to the voters and to let them decide. And why shouldn't Readfield be the recipient of these funds that people are putting out there for us to use? It's not like they're going to be returned and the tax burden is going to be lowered in any case, because that never happens. So I just wanted to state that I believe in both of these projects, and I hope that the voters have the same feeling. If they don't, then we will stop work on them. And if they do, we're full steam ahead. Okay, on to the Church Road sidewalk. Is that you, Eric?
Yeah, so I'll just run through this quickly. We did have a lengthy discussion last time, and I'll touch on that a little bit, but it's a multi-year project. It's federally funded. And it's really a safety, bicycle and pedestrian safety infrastructure project. It's connecting high-use areas in Readfield. So the fairgrounds is already a very high-use area. The sidewalk in on Main Street and the Readfield corner area are high use. So there's a lot of, I think, need there. And if the fairgrounds project moves forward, there's going to be more need. But even if that doesn't move forward, which I do hope it does as well, it's going to continue to see more and more use and more activity because it is a gem, and we have a real treasure there that we can use. Is right in the middle of town. And so about, Jesus, quite a few years ago now, 2017, we originally applied for and received town support for the grant. And we knew at that time it was an 80-20 grant. We had no idea what the cost would be, but we knew that we wanted to pursue that. And so that was supported in 2017. Move forward, we developed an application, submitted it a few times, and had to work to get approval from the federal government and the Maine Department of Transportation, but we were finally approved in 2021. So that was a long process, and it took some effort from community members and myself and others. But we were able to get that approved. And so in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, we began bringing requests for funding forward to voters to pay for some of the planning work and to put some money in reserve for the actual construction. So, and we do have money in reserve to cover a portion of this project cost. We'll talk about that later. The project moved forward with professional design support and involvement from the road committee and local residents. So it was an inclusive process that had both professional and I guess I'll say lay involvement and support. And I think we've come up with a pretty good proposal. It's not to everybody's liking, but public projects rarely are. If you're putting something in town right of way, there are bound to be disagreements, but I think that we've been respectful and had a good process. And I think that this project really does, if it goes into effect, add a lot of safety and just usability to these to that road and this portion of the town. So public involvement is ongoing, and that will continue to be a focus of the project. We're not going to just walk away from that. We have a lot more public engagement to do, particularly if the project is approved. We'll be working very, very closely with landowners, making sure that if there are any impacts, that they're compensated for those fully and fairly. There's a whole process for this with federal funds. That if the town puts gravel on someone's property, we have to think about whether or not there's an impact there and whether we owe them some money. So this isn't something we're going to be running roughshod over anybody in town. We're going to do the best we can to work within the right of way, which right now I think 99 or 100% of this project is in the town right of way, but we might have some grading impacts outside of that area. That might require some adjustments. But in any event, I just wanted to make the point that this is an equitable process and we're not going to be taking land or anything like that. We do have the plans that are available on the town website. We've been working on those for a while now. We've been discussing them at road committee meetings, select board meetings, public hearings. Several discussions have ensued, and we made changes from those. But what you see in the town meeting warrant is essentially the project. There's one crosswalk that's going to be a raised crosswalk. Everything else is a grade separated sidewalk that's around 5 feet wide with some bump outs and some on-street parking. But it wouldn't be right for us to vote on a design and then go back and change it. So necessarily, we're basically done with that design process. What will change is the vertical the piece. What happens with the drainage, all the subsurface stuff. That still needs to be designed, and it wasn't designed yet because we don't want to put money into something that we don't know is going to be approved. So we've gotten as far as we can comfortably, and if the project's approved, we'll move forward. If it's not, we'll stop. It is 80% federal funded and 20% local funded. So approximately $1.2 million project. We are using reserves for the local share, so there are no additional tax impacts. The $960,000 in federal grant funds will cover the remainder of that project. So it is a large chunk. And then the use of ARPA funds. We did put those into the road budget and then a transfer into the road from the road budget into the sidewalk project. That's just to meet federal requirements. If I could have said, we're just going to use these ARPA funds for the sidewalk directly, I would have, because it's simpler. But we do have to make sure that the federal government is satisfied with how we're applying these funds. So we're dancing that dance. And then the project itself includes safety and traffic calming measures. It also includes on-street parking, lighting improvements, and drainage improvements. So things that I think in some way help everybody. They help the local residents. They help anybody traveling that roadway. And it does and will make it a safer place for pedestrians and anybody that's traveling, including motorists, because they'll slow down a little bit. And Lord knows they go too fast on Church Road and most other roads in town, but Church is particularly bad. There are two related warrant articles for this project on the town meeting warrant, Article 16 and 17. The first one is the use of the ARPA funds, and that's where we are kind of shifting those funds into the road budget. And then Article 17, it shows the use of the federal funds that are coming from the Maine Department of Transportation, the $50,000 that we have in reserve already, and then that $190,000 that we're reallocating from the road budget for the sidewalk. That will be that basically covers the full funding cost of the project. Both articles are supported by the Select Board and the Budget Committee, and I certainly think this is a good, worthwhile project. The picture here is way too small to make any real value judgment on, but you do see that it starts off on the north side of the road and then moves over to the south side of the road. I guess if you want to look at it that way, I guess it could be, depending on the orientation, the west and east. West and east, yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah, that's probably closer. Yeah, west and east. But it does have a split. That split was there to make sure that we had good visibility, but also by doing this split, we were able to minimize impacts on properties that were closer to the road on one side or the other, and do our very best to keep everybody happy while providing a product and a project that works. So the website, again, I'll highlight that it is the best place to get information on this project and anything happening in the town of Readfield. But if people have questions, feel free to reach out to me or members of the road committee, and we'll answer your questions. And that's it for that project. Any questions on that from public?
What are we getting into when we talk about maintenance of that sidewalk? Is there something in the grant that says what standard we have to maintain with that sidewalk, or just build the sidewalk?
Yeah, so we need to maintain it basically the same standards we have for the Main Street sidewalk. So the maintenance obligations there, that's a good question. The maintenance obligations are basically an extension of the maintenance obligations we already have for the Main Street sidewalk. So it's incremental, right? That's the way I look at it, incremental cost, but 100% there is added cost in maintaining the sidewalk. I expect it's probably a couple $1,000s a year, but for the maintenance. But the thing that I go back to with this project is I think that's cheap insurance. I think that having this connection to the fairgrounds and that possibility for greatly improving our traffic and our parking situation at Readfield Corner, I think those are things that are important to consider in balancing out that cost, because there's a cost, but there's also, I think, a benefit. So we will have ongoing maintenance costs. And I talked to the staff about it. I talked to our plow contractor. Having one raised crosswalk that's 20 feet wide and 3.5 or 4 inches tall is not gonna do anything to a plow truck. It's not gonna change how that works. And the staff will just be running that extra third of a mile basically up and down the sidewalk. And that might take an extra half hour, 40 minutes for every storm. So there's an impact there, but I think it's manageable. Is that what you're looking for? Yeah. Yep.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep. So moving on to the warrant highlights, an LUO revision. The land use ordinance. I shouldn't use acronyms. Bruce would probably have a problem with this, but I apologize. But land use ordinance is a long term, so I just condensed it. But what we're looking at here are just changes relating to a state mandate. And believe it or not, it was actually a funded state mandate for the first part of the project. So they gave us money to work with consultants to do professional research and to draft changes to our land use ordinance that affect things like housing affordability, dwelling unit density, auxiliary dwelling units, things like in-law apartments, garage apartments. Those things the state thought were really important to mandate basically in some way in every town in the state of Maine. And I'll just say, I don't necessarily agree with their approach, but here we are. And we did take their money and we did use it to work with a consultant, and we came out with some great revisions that meet the letter of the law and not anything more. The planning board and I and the chair and everybody that worked on this, the code office, were very clear that we did not want to have a large, expansive ordinance change. This is just to meet state law. We did that, we did it well. And it was moved through the appropriate process. The planning board held their hearings and all is well there. I think it actually will be some positive changes for the town. Some things I question, but again, it's a state mandate, so we can't do much about it. So I will encourage folks to support this, because if it gets voted down, we have to go back to the drawing board and do it all over again. And I think that we've done good work, and there's no need for that type of no need for that. So other ordinance revisions, these are less substantive, but still important. Marijuana establishments ordinance, what we've done is limit the number of dispensaries that are in town to 2, and set a process so that if those change hands, if they fold, basically it's a license allocation schedule, so that even though we have a cap, it's fairly applied, right? And that's all that really does. The administrative ordinance addresses things that may or may not need changes because of changes in state law. The select board is given certain authority. A lot of this stuff really just relates to how we operate or how we operate efficiently. And some of these changes make it easier for us to operate efficiently. And that's how I describe that ordinance, set of ordinance revisions. And it is a revision. We actually had that in place. Same with the marijuana establishments. These are just revisions. Waste disposal and recycling ordinance, also revision. We've found it challenging to keep up with the type of materials and the classification of materials that are accepted and allowed and managed and how they're managed at the facility. And so we've modified the ordinance to be a little bit less detailed and reserve things like definitions for an appendix that can be amended by the select board or by the solid waste committee through a process so that we can better adapt to the changing waste stream that we're seeing. Also just dealt with some administrative issues and highlighted the need for a structured operation. So making sure that the role of the transfer station manager was established clearly and that we were doing what we needed to do to comply with state requirements. Because As much as land use is a hot topic right now, the state really wants us to do well with how we manage our waste. Property tax assistance program, another revision. This is a very positive one. The select board increased the amount of eligibility for residents. It's a piggyback program, so what happens is folks are eligible if they have applied for and received benefits from the state of Maine through their property tax fairness credit program. We used to call it the circuit breaker program. But we had fixed values there, and we also had a program that wasn't that effective because there were some administrative things that we didn't foresee that we needed to resolve. So two things there: the process is easier and more understandable, and the eligibility amount is higher, which will help any resident, particularly senior residents. And the disposition of tax acquired property ordinance. This is a new ordinance, but it's based on a policy that we had in the town to deal with tax acquired property. And again, this is another state mandate, but it was also supported by federal changes at the Supreme Court that basically said that towns cannot, without a process or good reason, keep the proceeds of a sale of a foreclosed property. They need to keep just what's owed and just what it costs them to manage that process. And the rest gets pushed back to the former property owner. And Readfield was actually ahead of the curve on this. We had actually fought against the state to be able to issue some of those funds, and it finally took a change in law and the Supreme Court to help back that up. We weren't part of the litigation there, but it did benefit us because we wanted to do the right thing and make sure that residents that needed the money and that were entitled to it got it back. So long story short, this allows sets a process for returning those proceeds fairly and equitably to any property owner that has had their property tax acquired. And that is all I had for ordinances. Any questions on any of those?
There's none online.
Not online.
None online. I'll start there, but I have a quick one just for review. Clarification, Eric, just the marijuana establishment ordinance. We're not changing anything really. We're just making sure we have things in place, limit. We're still only looking at medical marijuana establishments in the town of Readfield.
Absolutely, and that's a good point. So when we first opted into this, if you all remember, there was this big thing about towns opting in or opting out. The town of Readfield considered a whole slate of possible marijuana establishments, everything from adult use to manufacturing, and only a limited set of those were approved in Readfield. And so basically, we allow outdoor and indoor grows under pretty strict conditions, and we also allow caregiver retail, which is specific. It's not a dispensary, that's different. Caregiver retail, where people that have an individual license can serve their folks that have a card that allows them to have medical marijuana. And so we had been concerned about the proliferation of those type of businesses in other communities. So we thought that it would be best to keep our little piece of the world at 2 and let Manchester have all the rest. So.
And 2 is what we already had, so it's not that we were reducing anybody's business who is currently operating.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, so it is a limited scope and there are no other changes. It's just the licensure limit and the process for acquiring that. So.
Thank you for clarification.
No problem.
So closing comments, I'll start off and then you guys can add anything you'd like. I started at the beginning by saying, I'm not sure if we needed to have 2 meetings, but we agreed to do this year, primarily because we had concerns and I think had heard from some folks that they'd like us to have the meeting before the absentee ballots went out. I think it's about 30% of our voters have been voting absentee ballot. So if you have a third essentially of your population that hasn't heard all the explanation, might not have received the newspaper mailing that we sent out, we bumped that up so that it would go out ahead of time also this year. But then we had always had this meeting about 2 weeks before the elections, the in-person voting. And so we decided to keep both this year. So I have 2 things. Do we really have a need for 2 hearings when we've already had the public meeting with input in March? And if that's a no, do we think it's better to keep it at the earlier stage or at this point in time? Or is that something we don't really want to weigh in on at this time?
Well, I think the fact that you had it early, so people who got their absentee ballots had information that they would have had.
So you like that? Dave?
I agree with that earlier meeting as well. I think saying in future years, we don't need to, every year changes the maybe other topics.
True.
That we may need that second meeting, or people may feel we need that second meeting, maybe get some feedback from the public too. Before
I
next
think
year.
we have some feedback. No one online, no one present. Last time we had people online and we had,
Oh,
well.
wait a minute, wait a minute.
All right, I said that wrong.
Hannah's throwing papers now, that's just mad.
No public at large has been
I
present.
agree,
The
that's-
people
that's
who
a
have,
pretty big statement, but again, some years and you have some real punish, you would get some feedback about not having a second meeting.
Right.
So
Right.
maybe it's a year thing to judge. Definitely do the one early and decide when we need the second.
I would agree with that 100%. I think that there's no point in saying right now, we don't need a second meeting. As long as we can look at things next year and decide based on what it looks like next year.
well, just be aware, we set this in October. We
Mm-hmm.
set, Eric sets the budget process and all those dates in October. So we kind of have to know then. We could always add
Right.
another meeting.
But I think we'll know,
We have
have a better
time.
feel in October than we do in, May.
That's great. So that's something we can discuss in the summer. Yes, Andy?
One kind of side piece is I know we can't coordinate perfectly with the school. We never do. But it would be really nice if we didn't have one of these hearings the same night as the floor vote on their budget.
I heard that from school board members also.
And I'm asking them really
Yeah.
indirectly.
Yeah, I heard that from school board members that plan to check our early produced calendar much earlier. So,
And does the school always do their meetings on Wednesdays?
The school board does, yeah.
Yeah.
The school board does?
Yeah.
So I think one possible thing to look at is having if we have two meetings, don't have them on the same day of the week. And if we only have one meeting, let's not have it on a Wednesday because we know the school will have it on a Wednesday and they could happen on the same date again. And so pick a different day.
Fair.
If it's just one. That's a really good thought. I'd also like to hear more from the school board. I've heard some things that people have said that, would be nice for the school board to keep the public more abreast of things as they're happening throughout the year. I don't know if there's a way we can have some of that input put in so we can put it on our website. Hey, news from the school board, here's a link, highlights, whatever. We try to do that, so. Great. Anybody have any other issues or ideas or thoughts?
Pertaining to town and just issues, but a lot of issues.
Concerning the budget, the warrant, or the two proposals. I'll be more specific. And again, I apologize. There are members of the public here, but they weren't at large. They were here for a specific reason, and I appreciate them. How tactless of me. So just a reminder that June 11th is the in-person vote. It is by secret ballot. Absentee ballots are available through June 6th, which is Friday. Is that right?
yeah.
It's Thursday,
Thursday?
Thursday, June 6th.
Okay, at 5 p.m. If you have a ballot and you have, as long as you have received one, you can continue to return it to the town office. Is the box open outside?
It's open 24/7 and it'll be open and be checking the box all through voting day and you can bring your absentee ballot in an envelope to voting, the voting booth if you'd like, so.
Right, you can just turn it in at the actual voting place.
Exactly, yeah.
So, okay, if there's nothing else, I'll adjourn the meeting at 7:43. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks,
So we have a meeting Monday.
Monday.